I heard what you said about me. Lydia Hale stood in the doorway of her husband's study, hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. 3 months of marriage, 3 months of silence, 3 months of pretending she hadn't overheard Rowan Ashcroft tell his steward that wedding her was like shackling himself to dead weight. The estate was dying. She knew that now. The numbers didn't lie, even if everyone around her did. Tonight she would save them all, whether he wanted her to or not. Stay with me until the end. Like this video and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning Lydia Hale became Lydia Ashcroft, the sky over Greymont Estate hung low and colorless, like something had been drained out of it. No rain, no sun, just that flat, indifferent gray that made everything look older than it was. She stood at the chapel door in a dress that didn't fit right, borrowed from her cousin, taken in at the waist but still loose through the shoulders. The lace itched against her collarbone. She didn't adjust it. There was no point. No one was looking at her anyway. Except him. Rowan Ashcroft waited at the altar like a man attending a funeral. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that might have been handsome if it weren't so rigid. Dark hair, darker eyes, jaw set like he was biting down on something bitter. He didn't look at her when she walked down the aisle. He looked past her, toward the back wall, toward anywhere else. The vows were short, efficient. The priest's voice echoed too much in the empty chapel, only a handful of witnesses, mostly Rowan's people. Her family hadn't come. Her father was too sick, her brother too ashamed. When Rowan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands were cold. "You may kiss the bride," the priest said. Rowan's jaw tightened. He leaned in, pressed his lips to her cheek, barely, like touching something contaminated, and pulled back before she could even register the contact. That was it. She was married. The reception was worse. Held in the Great Hall of Greymont Estate, a sprawling stone structure that had seen better decades. The furniture was fine but worn, the tapestries faded, the floor scuffed from years of boots and neglect. Lydia sat at the head table beside her new husband, who spoke to everyone except her. "Rowan, congratulations," said one of the neighboring landowners, a stout man with a red face and too much wine in his glass. "Your father would be proud." "Thank you, Edmund." Rowan's voice was flat. "And Mrs. Ashcroft," Edmund continued, turning to Lydia with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to the valley. I'm sure you'll settle in." "Thank you," Lydia said quietly. Edmund didn't wait for more. He turned back to Rowan, launching into some story about grain prices and tariffs. Lydia sat there, hands folded in her lap, and let the conversation wash over her. This was her life now. Across the table, Rowan's steward, a wiry man named Garrett with sharp features and sharper eyes, leaned in to whisper something. Rowan nodded, his expression unchanging. Garrett glanced at Lydia, just for a second, and she saw it. Pity. She looked down at her plate. The food was fine. She wasn't hungry. When the guests finally left and the hall emptied, Rowan stood without a word and walked toward the side corridor. Lydia followed, because what else was she supposed to do? He led her upstairs, down a long hallway lined with portraits of dead Ashcrofts, men with hard faces and women with tired eyes. At the end of the hall, he stopped in front of a door. "This is your room," he said. Lydia blinked. "My room? You'll have your own space." He didn't look at her. "I'm down the hall. If you need anything, ask the housekeeper." Where will you? I have work to do." He turned and walked away before she could finish. Lydia stood there, alone in the hallway, staring at the door. Slowly, she pushed it open. The room was fine, clean. A bed, a wardrobe, a small writing desk by the window. Impersonal. Like a guest room. Like she was temporary. She sat on the edge of the bed and folded her hands in her lap. This was her wedding night. The first week passed in a blur of silence. Rowan left early every morning, before dawn, and didn't return until after dark. Lydia saw him at dinner sometimes, but he barely spoke. When he did, it was practical. Questions about whether she needed anything, whether the staff were treating her well. He never asked how she was. The staff were polite, distant. The housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, was a stern woman in her 50s who ran the household with military precision. She showed Lydia around the estate, explained the routines, introduced her to the cook, the maids, the groundskeepers. If you need anything, Mrs. Ashcroft, just let me know, Mrs. Calloway said, though her tone suggested she didn't expect Lydia to need much. Thank you, Lydia said. The maids whispered. She heard them sometimes, in the hallways, around corners. They didn't say her name, but she knew they were talking about her. The poor girl from the ruined family, the charity case, the wife Rowan didn't want. She tried to make herself useful. She asked Mrs. Calloway if there was anything she could help with, mending, organizing, anything. Mrs. Calloway gave her a tight smile and said, "That's very kind, ma'am, but we have everything under control." Translation: stay out of the way. So she did. She spent her days in the library, a dusty room on the second floor filled with books no one had touched in years. She read. She walked the grounds when the weather allowed. She wrote letters to her father, though she never sent them. What was there to say? Dear Father, I am married to a man who looks at me like I'm a stain on his floor. The estate is beautiful. I am very happy. She couldn't write that. At night, she lay in bed and listened to the old house settle around her, the creak of floorboards, the whistle of wind through cracks in the stone. Sometimes she heard footsteps in the hallway. Rowan, pacing. She wondered if he slept at all. Man. It was 2 weeks into the marriage when she overheard the conversation. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She'd been walking past Rowan's study on her way to the library when she heard voices inside. Rowan and Garrett. The door was slightly ajar. You can't keep avoiding this, Garrett was saying. The creditors won't wait forever. I'm handling it. Rowan's voice was tight. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, we're 3 months from losing everything. Silence. Lydia froze in the hallway. The timber deal fell through, Garrett continued. The western fields are barely producing, and now you've taken on a wife with no dowry, no connections. Enough. I'm just saying, Rowan, you've made this harder on yourself. Your father left you a mess, and instead of fixing it, I said enough. A pause. Then Garrett, quieter. She seems harmless, at least. Rowan laughed, a short, bitter sound. Harmless. That's one word for it. You could have married someone useful. I married the daughter of a man my father owed a debt to. I did what I was supposed to do. And now you're shackled to dead weight. Lydia's breath caught. She's not dead weight, Rowan said, but his voice lacked conviction. She's just not what I needed. Then what are you going to do? What I always do. Handle it. Lydia didn't wait to hear more. She turned and walked quietly back down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. Dead weight. She went to her room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. She didn't cry. There was no point. She'd known, hadn't she? From the moment he'd looked past her at the altar, from the moment he'd given her a separate room, from the way the staff treated her like a stranger in her own home. But hearing him say it, was different. She sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Then slowly she stood and walked to the small writing desk by the window. She opened the drawer and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing: she wasn't dead weight. The next morning, Lydia started paying attention. She watched the way Garrett moved through the estate, always in a hurry, always frowning. She noticed the way the groundskeepers avoided the western fields. She saw the stack of unopened letters on Rowan's desk when she walked past his study. At dinner that night, she broke the silence. "How are the fields?" she asked. Rowan looked up from his plate, startled. "What?" "The western fields. I noticed the workers haven't been going out there much." He frowned. "That's not your concern." "I'm your wife." "Isn't it?" "No." He went back to eating. Lydia set down her fork. "I'd like to help." "Help with what?" "With the estate. With whatever needs doing." Rowan stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You don't know anything about running an estate." "Then teach me." "Lydia, I'm not asking to take over. I'm asking to be useful." "You're useful enough as you are." "Am I?" He didn't answer. He just stood, dropped his napkin on the table, and walked out. Lydia sat there alone, the silence pressing in around her. Fine. If he wouldn't teach her, she'd figure it out herself. The estate ledgers were kept in Rowan's study, locked in a cabinet behind his desk. Lydia knew this because she'd seen Garrett retrieve them once, early in the morning when she'd been walking past. The key was on Rowan's key ring, which he kept in his coat pocket. She didn't have access to that, but the housekeeper did. Mrs. Calloway had a master set of keys for the entire estate, kept in her office near the kitchens. It took Lydia 3 days to work up the courage. She waited until mid-afternoon when Mrs. Calloway was overseeing the weekly laundry in the courtyard. Then she slipped into the small, cluttered office and found the key ring hanging on a hook by the door. Her hands shook as she unhooked it. She walked quickly back upstairs, unlocked the study, and went straight to the cabinet. The ledgers were there. 3 thick, leather-bound books, each labeled by year. She pulled out the most recent one and carried it to the desk. She opened it. Numbers. Columns of numbers. Income, expenses, debts, payments. She scanned the pages, her eyes adjusting to the cramped handwriting. And then she saw it. The estate was hemorrhaging money, not slowly, not gradually, hemorrhaging. The timber deal Garrett had mentioned collapsed. The Western Fields underperforming for 3 years straight. Loans taken out to cover losses, interest piling up. Unpaid creditors. Overdue bills. Lydia flipped back further, tracing the decline. Rowan's father had left him this. A legacy of bad decisions, failed ventures, and pride disguised as investment. And Rowan was drowning in it. She sat there for a long time, staring at the numbers. Then she pulled out a blank sheet of paper and started taking notes. Over the next 2 weeks, Lydia became a ghost in her own home. She woke early, before the staff, and returned the ledgers each morning before Rowan came down for breakfast. She spent her days in the library, cross-referencing her notes, sketching out possibilities. The estate wasn't unsalvageable. It was badly managed, yes, but there were assets. Land that could be repurposed, contracts that could be renegotiated, workers who were being underutilized. The problem wasn't the estate. It was Rowan. He was trying to run it the way his father had, focused on status, on appearances, on maintaining the Ashcroft name. He was bleeding money on things that didn't matter, hosting dinners for visiting landowners, maintaining buildings that were barely used, paying for staff positions that were redundant. He was proud, and pride was expensive. Lydia wrote out a plan. Not a full strategy, not yet, but the bones of one. She highlighted 3 immediate changes that could stop the bleeding, consolidate the staff, lease the unused northern pastures, and renegotiate the grain contracts with the mill in the valley. She didn't know if it would work, but it was something. She folded the paper and tucked it into her desk drawer. And then, one night at dinner, she tried again. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. Rowan looked up. "About what?" "The estate." His expression darkened. "Lydia, just listen, please." He sighed, set down his fork. "Fine. I think we could save money if we consolidated some of the staff positions. There's overlap. You've been going through the ledgers." She froze. Rowan's eyes were sharp now, focused. "How long?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He laughed, short and humorless. "And now you think you know how to run this place." "I didn't say that." "You've been here a month, Lydia. 1 month. You don't know anything about this estate, about these people, about what it takes to keep this place running." "I know we're in debt." His jaw tightened. "I know the Western Fields haven't turned a profit in 3 years," she continued, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I know you're paying for staff we don't need and hosting dinners we can't afford." "Stop. I know you're trying to save your father's legacy, but Rowan, there's nothing left to save." He stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "You don't get to walk in here and tell me how to run my estate," he said, his voice low and cold. "You don't get to sit in your room, play with numbers, and pretend you understand what I'm dealing with." "I'm trying to help. I don't need your help." The words landed like a slap. Lydia stood slowly, her hands trembling. "Then what do you need?" He didn't answer. She waited. 1 breath, 2. Then she turned and walked out. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, staring at the folded paper in her drawer. The plan she'd written, the numbers she'd memorized. She thought about Rowan's face when he told her to stop. The anger, the fear underneath it. He was scared. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't heartless. He was just scared. And he didn't know how to ask for help. Lydia pulled out the paper and unfolded it. Then she picked up her pen and kept writing. 3 days later, the first creditor arrived. Lydia was in the library when she heard the commotion downstairs, raised voices, heavy boots on stone. She set down her book and went to the landing. In the entry hall, a man in a fine coat stood toe-to-toe with Rowan, Garrett hovering anxiously nearby. "You're 3 months overdue," the man was saying, his voice echoing. "I've been patient, Ashcroft, but my patience has limits." "I'll have the payment to you by the end of the month," Rowan said evenly. "That's what you said last month." "And I meant it." "Then where's the money?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "I said I'll have it." The man stepped closer. "You're running out of time. Your father's name might have bought you some leeway, but you're not your father. And frankly, from what I've seen, you're not half the man he was." Rowan's hands curled into fists. Lydia held her breath. Then Rowan said quietly, "Get out." The man smiled. 2 weeks, Ashcroft. After that, I'm taking this to the magistrate." He turned and walked out, his boots echoing through the hall. The door slammed. Rowan stood there, staring at the floor. Garrett cleared his throat. "Rowan, not now. We need to—" "I said not now." Garrett hesitated, then nodded and left. Rowan stood alone in the entry hall, his shoulders rigid, his breathing uneven. Lydia watched from the landing. She wanted to go to him, to say something, but she didn't, not yet. That night she finished the plan. It was 20 pages long, detailed, thorough, every number checked, every projection verified. It wasn't perfect. There were risks, variables she couldn't control, but it was solid. It could work. She read through it one last time, then set it on her desk. Tomorrow she would give it to him, whether he wanted it or not. But first, she needed to tell him the truth. She needed to tell him she'd heard what he said, and she needed to tell him that she was staying anyway. No. The next morning, Lydia found Rowan in the stables. He was brushing down his horse, his movements slow and mechanical. He didn't look up when she approached. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I'm busy. It's important." He sighed, set down the brush. "What is it?" Lydia took a breath. "I heard what you said 2 weeks ago, in your study." Rowan frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You and Garrett. You said I was dead weight." His face went still. "You said you didn't need me," she continued, her voice steady. "That I wasn't what you needed." He didn't deny it. "I just wanted you to know," she said quietly, "that I heard you, and I understand." Rowan looked away. "Lydia, but I'm not leaving." He looked back at her, startled. "I'm not leaving," she repeated, "because this estate is dying and you're too proud to see it. And if someone doesn't do something, you're going to lose everything." "Lydia, I have a plan." She held out the folded papers. "It's not perfect, but it's a start. And if you're willing to listen, really listen, I think we can save this place." Rowan stared at the papers. Then, slowly, he took them. He unfolded them, scanned the first page, then the second. His expression didn't change. Lydia waited. Finally, he looked up. "Where did you learn this?" "I taught myself." "Why?" "Because someone had to." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he folded the papers and handed them back. "It won't work," he said. Lydia's heart sank. "Why not?" "Because it requires me to give up things I can't give up." "Like what?" "Like my father's legacy, like the Ashcroft name." "Rowan, the Ashcroft name won't mean anything if you're bankrupt." He turned away. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." He didn't answer. Lydia stood there, holding the papers, her chest tight. Then she said quietly, "I know you didn't want to marry me. I know I'm not what you needed, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. So you can either let me help you, or you can watch this place fall apart." She turned and walked away. Rowan didn't stop her, but as she reached the stable door, she heard his voice. "Lydia." She stopped. "Leave the papers on my desk." She looked back at him. He was still facing away, his shoulders tense, but there was something different in his voice, something softer. "I'll read them," he said. Lydia nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Then she walked back to the house, her heart pounding, and left the plan on his desk, and waited. 3 days passed before Rowan said anything. Lydia saw him at meals, brief, silent affairs where he ate quickly and left without meeting her eyes. The papers sat on his desk, undisturbed as far as she could tell. She walked past his study twice a day, glancing through the cracked door, but never saw him reading them. Maybe he'd thrown them away. Maybe he'd decided she was overstepping, that a wife who'd been there barely a month had no business trying to save an estate she didn't understand. Maybe he was right. On the fourth morning, she found him in the dining room at breakfast, the papers spread across the table beside his plate. He looked up when she entered. His eyes were shadowed, like he hadn't slept. "Sit down," he said. Lydia sat. Rowan pushed his plate aside and tapped the top page. "This section here, about leasing the northern pastures to the Hendersons. What about it?" "They won't pay what you're projecting. They're cheap. They're cheap because no one's pressured them. They've been underpaying for grazing rights for 5 years. If you renegotiate, they'll walk away." "Then let them. The Carters have been asking about land for months." Rowan frowned. "How do you know that?" "I listen." He stared at her for a moment, then went back to the papers. "And this, cutting the household staff by a third. Mrs. Calloway will fight you on that. Mrs. Calloway doesn't run this estate. You do. She's been here longer than I have. That doesn't mean she's right." Rowan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "You're asking me to fire people who've been loyal to my family for decades. I'm asking you to keep the estate from collapsing so you can still employ anyone at all." He didn't respond. Lydia folded her hands on the table. "You don't have to do everything I wrote, but you need to do something, because in 3 months, maybe less, you won't have a choice." Rowan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the wedding. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Why do you care if this place survives? You didn't want to be here any more than I wanted you here." Lydia's chest tightened. "That's not, isn't it?" He leaned forward. "You married me because your family needed the alliance. I married you because my father owed a debt. Neither of us had a choice. So why are you trying so hard to fix something that was broken before you even got here?" She didn't know how to answer that, because the truth was complicated. Yes, she'd married him out of duty. Yes, she'd walked into this house knowing she wasn't wanted. But somewhere in the past month, somewhere between the whispered conversations and the empty hallways and the quiet, desperate look on his face when that creditor had threatened him, she'd stopped thinking of this as a temporary arrangement. This was her home now, whether he liked it or not. "Because it's mine too," she said finally. "This estate, this house, your debts, your problems. I'm your wife. That makes them mine." Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He looked back down at the papers. "I'll think about it," he said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Lydia stood. "Don't think too long." She left him there, surrounded by numbers and plans he didn't want to admit he needed. But when she glanced back from the doorway, he was reading again. That was something. The next week, Rowan started making changes. Small ones at first. He let 2 of the stable hands go, consolidating their duties with the groundskeepers. He canceled the monthly dinners for the neighboring landowners. He sent Garrett to meet with the Carters about the northern pastures. Lydia watched from a distance, not pushing, not asking. She'd given him the plan. What he did with it was up to him. But she couldn't help noticing the way he looked at her now. Less like she was an unwanted burden and more like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. One afternoon, she found him in the courtyard, talking to one of the older groundskeepers, a man named Thomas, who'd worked the estate for 40 years. "I'm not asking you to leave," Rowan was saying, his voice strained. "I'm asking you to take a reduced schedule, half days. You'd still have your cottage, still have your wages, just less of them." Thomas interrupted, his weathered face hard. "Thomas, your father wouldn't have done this." Rowan flinched. Thomas shook his head and walked away, leaving Rowan standing alone in the courtyard, his shoulders tight. Lydia stepped forward. "You did the right thing." Rowan turned, startled. "You were listening?" "I was walking by." He looked away. "Doesn't feel right." "It's not supposed to." Your father left you a mess," Lydia said gently. "You can't fix it by doing what he did." Rowan's jaw worked. "He built this place. No, he inherited it just like you did, and he spent his whole life trying to prove he deserved it instead of actually taking care of it." The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but they were true. Rowan didn't argue. He just stood there, staring at the ground, his hands clenched at his sides. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. It was the first time she'd heard him admit it. "You're doing it right now," Lydia said. He looked at her, and for a moment she saw something raw in his expression, something vulnerable and exhausted and scared. Then he turned and walked back toward the house. But he didn't tell her to leave, and that felt like progress. 2 weeks later, the creditor came back. Lydia was in the library when she heard the shouting. She set down her book and hurried to the landing, her heart pounding. In the entry hall, the same man from before stood with 2 others, broad-shouldered men with the look of hired muscle. Rowan stood between them and Garrett, his face pale. "I gave you 2 weeks," the creditor said. "Where's my money?" "I need more time." "You've had time. I want payment. Now." "I don't have it." The creditor smiled, cold and sharp. "Then we'll start taking collateral." "You can't." "I can, and I will." He gestured to the 2 men. "Start with the horses." "Wait." One of the men moved toward the side corridor, toward the stables. Rowan stepped in front of him. "You're not taking anything." The man shoved him aside. Rowan stumbled, caught himself, and swung. His fist connected with the man's jaw, and suddenly everything erupted. The second man lunged at Rowan. Garrett tried to pull him back. The creditor shouted something. Lydia ran down the stairs without thinking, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Stop!" Everyone froze. She stepped into the entry hall, her heart hammering, and looked at the creditor. "How much does he owe you?" The creditor raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? How much, exactly?" 3,000. Lydia's stomach dropped. That was more than she'd thought, more than the plan accounted for. But she kept her voice steady. "Give us 1 month. We'll have it." The creditor laughed. "And why should I believe that?" "Because if you take the horses, you'll get maybe 500 for them. If you take this to the magistrate, you'll spend months in court and still get nothing. But if you give us 1 month, you'll get everything you're owed, with interest." The man studied her, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" "His wife." "The wife with no dowry?" Lydia didn't flinch. "The wife with a plan." The creditor glanced at Rowan, who stood frozen, blood on his knuckles. Then he looked back at Lydia. 1 month, he said, "not a day more. And if you don't have it, I'm not just taking the horses. I'm taking the land." He turned and walked out, his men following. The door slammed. Silence filled the hall. Garrett let out a shaky breath. "That was reckless," Rowan finished, his voice tight. He looked at Lydia. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking they were about to take your horses. So you promised them 3,000 pounds we don't have?" "We'll have it?" "How?" Lydia hesitated. "I don't know yet." Rowan laughed, sharp and humorless. "You don't know?" "I'll figure it out." "Lydia, you're welcome, by the way." She turned and walked back upstairs, her hands shaking, her pulse racing. Behind her, she heard Garrett say something low to Rowan, but she didn't catch the words. She went to her room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. 3,000 pounds, 1 month. She'd just promised something she had no idea how to deliver. But she'd meant what she said. She'd figure it out. She had to. That night, Lydia didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, the estate ledger spread in front of her, running numbers until her eyes burned. There was no way to raise 3,000 pounds in a month. Not legally. Not without selling off half the estate, which would defeat the entire purpose. Unless... She stopped, her pen hovering over the page. The Western Fields. They'd been failing for 3 years, producing barely enough to cover the cost of maintaining them. Rowan had been pouring money into them, trying to make them profitable again, but it wasn't working. But what if they stopped trying to grow grain? What if they repurposed the land entirely? Lydia pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started sketching. The valley had been talking about expanding the rail line for 2 years. If it went through, they'd need a depot, a place to store goods, transfer cargo. The Western Fields were perfectly positioned for that. If Rowan leased the land to the rail company, even temporarily, it could bring in enough to cover the debt. Maybe even more. She worked through the night, calculating, cross-referencing, checking her numbers again and again. By dawn, she had a proposal. It wasn't perfect. It required Rowan to give up his father's dream of restoring the fields. It required him to trust her. But it could work. She folded the paper, got dressed, and went to find him. Rowan was in the stables mucking out stalls. He looked up when she entered, his expression guarded. What do you want? I have an idea. Another one? A better one. He set down the pitchfork. I'm listening. Lydia handed him the paper. Lease the western fields to the rail company. They're expanding the line. They need a depot. We have the land. Rowan scanned the page, his frown deepening. This is my father's land. Your father's land isn't producing anything. He spent years trying to restore it. And it didn't work. Rowan, you can keep pouring money into a dream, or you can save the estate. You can't do both. He looked at her, his jaw tight. You're asking me to give up. I'm asking you to adapt. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. You don't understand. I understand that you're running out of time. Lydia's voice rose despite herself. You have 1 month. 1. And if you don't have that money, you lose everything. Not just the fields, everything. Rowan's hands curled into fists. I know that. Then stop fighting me. I'm not fighting you. Yes, you are. You've been fighting me since the day I got here. You didn't want me. Fine. I didn't want to be here either, but I am here, and I'm trying to help you, and you keep acting like I'm the enemy. Her voice cracked on the last word. Rowan stared at her. Lydia took a breath, forcing herself to steady. I know you loved your father. I know you want to honor his legacy, but his legacy is killing you, and if you don't let it go, there won't be anything left to save. The silence stretched between them. Then Rowan said quietly, He'd be ashamed of me. Why? Because I'm failing. Everything he built, everything he worked for, I'm watching it fall apart, and I don't know how to stop it. Lydia stepped closer. You're not failing. You're just trying to do it alone. He looked at her, and she saw it again, that raw, desperate fear underneath the pride. I don't know how to trust you, he said. Then start. She held out the paper again. Rowan looked at it for a long moment. Then slowly, he took it. I'll talk to the rail company, he said. Lydia felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. He nodded, not meeting her eyes, and turned back to the stalls. But as she walked away, she heard him say, Lydia. She stopped. You didn't have to step in yesterday, with the creditor. Yes, I did. Why? She looked back at him. Because you would have done the same for me. It wasn't true, not yet, but she wanted it to be. Rowan didn't argue. He just went back to work. And Lydia walked back to the house, her heart pounding, hoping she was right. The meeting with the rail company took a week to arrange. Garrett handled the logistics, setting up a time for the company's representative, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Brennan, to visit the estate and assess the land. Lydia wanted to be there. Rowan didn't argue. They met in Rowan's study, the three of them plus Garrett. Brennan spread a map across the desk, marking the proposed route of the rail line with a thick pencil. The western fields would be ideal, he said. Close to the main line, flat terrain, easy access. We'd need a 5-year lease at minimum. What's the rate? Rowan asked. Brennan named a figure. It was less than Lydia had projected. Her heart sank. That's too low, she said before she could stop herself. Brennan looked at her, surprised. Excuse me? You're asking for prime land in a high-traffic corridor. The rate should be at least double that. Mrs. Ashcroft. It's Mrs. Ashcroft who's been managing the numbers, Rowan interrupted, his voice calm. And she's right. Your offer's insulting. Brennan frowned. The company has other options. Then take them, Lydia said. But you won't find land this well-positioned anywhere else in the valley. Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. You drive a hard bargain. I drive a fair one. He glanced at Rowan. Your wife is formidable. Yes, Rowan said quietly. She is. Brennan picked up his pencil and crossed out the original number. He wrote a new one, higher, but still not quite what Lydia wanted. Final offer, he said. Lydia looked at Rowan. He nodded. Deal, she said. They shook hands and Brennan left with promises to have the contracts drawn up within the week. When the door closed, Garrett let out a low whistle. I've never seen anyone negotiate like that. Lydia's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. Rowan walked to the window, staring out at the fields. Will it be enough? With the other changes, yes, barely. He nodded slowly, then he turned to look at her. Thank you. It was the first time he'd said it. Lydia's throat tightened. You're welcome. Garrett excused himself, leaving them alone. Rowan crossed the room and stopped in front of her. I was wrong, he said. About you. Lydia's pulse quickened. What do you mean? When I said you weren't what I needed? He hesitated. You're exactly what I needed. I just didn't know it. She didn't know what to say. Rowan looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he just nodded and walked out. Lydia stood there, her heart pounding, the words echoing in her head. You're exactly what I needed. It wasn't love, but it was a start. The contracts came through a week later. Rowan signed them, and the rail company transferred the first installment of the lease, enough to cover the creditor's debt with a little left over. When the payment went through, Lydia felt like she could breathe for the first time in weeks. They weren't safe. Not yet. There were still debts to pay, still changes to make. But they'd bought time. That night, Rowan invited her to dinner, not the silent, tense meals they usually shared, but an actual dinner. He'd had the cook prepare something special, and he poured wine for both of them. To survival, he said, raising his glass. Lydia clinked hers against his. To survival. They drank, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt almost comfortable. I've been thinking, Rowan said after a moment. About what? About the estate. About what comes next. And? I want you to be part of it, not just behind the scenes. I want people to know you're the reason we're still standing. Lydia's breath caught. Rowan, I mean it. You saved this place. You deserve the credit. I didn't do it for credit. I know, but you're getting it anyway. He reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since the wedding. His palm was warm, rough with calluses. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for the way I treated you, for the things I said. Lydia's eyes stung. You didn't know me. That's not an excuse. No, but it's a reason. He squeezed her hand gently. I'd like to know you now, if you'll let me. Lydia looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen before. Hope. I'd like that, she said. They sat there for a long time, hands clasped, the weight of the past month slowly lifting. And for the first time since she'd walked into Greymont Estate, Lydia felt like she might actually belong. But the peace didn't last. 3 days later, Mrs. Calloway came to Lydia's room, her face pale. There's been an accident, she said. Lydia's stomach dropped. What kind of accident? In the western fields, one of the rail workers. He's hurt badly. Lydia rushed downstairs and found Rowan in the entry hall, already pulling on his coat. How bad? He was asking Garrett. Bad. They're saying he might not make it. Rowan swore under his breath. What happened? Lydia asked. Garrett looked grim. Equipment malfunction. A crane collapsed. He was underneath. Rowan headed for the door. I'm going down there. I'm coming with you, Lydia said. He didn't argue. They rode together to the western fields where a crowd had gathered around the collapsed crane. The injured man lay on the ground, unconscious, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The rail company's foreman was shouting orders, but everyone looked panicked. Rowan dismounted and pushed through the crowd. Has anyone sent for a doctor? He's on his way, someone said. Good. Get this man stabilized, carefully. Lydia stood back, her heart racing, watching Rowan take charge. And then she saw it. One of the workers, a younger man, barely more than a boy, standing off to the side, his face sheet white. She walked over to him. Are you all right? He shook his head. It's my fault. What? The crane. I was supposed to check the cables this morning. I forgot. Lydia's blood ran cold. Does anyone else know? No, but they will. And when they do, his voice broke. I'll lose everything. Lydia looked back at Rowan, who was directing the workers, his voice calm and steady. Then she looked at the boy. Listen to me, she said quietly. You're going to tell Rowan what happened, right now. I can't. You have to. If you don't and someone finds out later, it'll be worse. The boy's hands shook. He'll fire me. Maybe, but he'll respect you for telling the truth. The boy hesitated. Then slowly, he nodded. Lydia walked him over to Rowan, who was still coordinating the response. Rowan, she said, this man has something to tell you. Rowan looked up, his expression sharp. What is it? The boy stammered out the story, his voice barely audible. When he finished, the silence was deafening. Rowan's face went hard. You forgot to check the cables, he said flatly. Yes, sir. And because of that, a man might die. The boy's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. Rowan stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, Go home. I'll deal with you later. The boy fled. Lydia stood beside Rowan, her heart pounding. You did the right thing, she said quietly. Did I? Rowan's voice was tight. A man's life is hanging by a thread because someone didn't do their job. And now you know why. You can fix the problem. You can make sure it doesn't happen again. Rowan looked at her, his eyes dark. This is what it costs. Every decision, every risk, it costs something. I know. He turned back to the scene, his jaw set, and Lydia stood beside him, watching the chaos unfold, knowing that this was only the beginning. The estate was still fragile. The debts were still crushing, and every step forward came with a price. But they were moving forward, together. And that had to count for something. The worker died 3 days later. His name was Peter Grimshaw. 26 years old, married, 2 children under 5. Rowan paid for the funeral. He stood at the graveside with his hat in his hands, his face like stone, while the widow sobbed into her sister's shoulder. Lydia stood beside him, watching the way his jaw worked, the way his ear gripped the brim of his hat so hard his knuckles went white. When it was over, when the last shovelful of dirt had been thrown and the mourners had dispersed, Rowan walked back to the carriage without a word. Lydia followed. They rode back to the estate in silence. The sky was gray, threatening rain that never came. The horses' hooves clopped against the dirt road, rhythmic and hollow. When they reached Greymont, Rowan climbed down and walked straight to his study without looking at her. Lydia stood in the courtyard, watching him go. Mrs. Calloway appeared at her elbow. Ma'am, will you be wanting dinner? I don't know, Lydia said quietly. Shall I ask Mr. Ashcroft? No, don't disturb him. Mrs. Calloway hesitated, then nodded and retreated. Lydia walked inside and went upstairs to her room. She sat at her desk and stared at the ledgers she'd been working on that morning, numbers and projections that suddenly felt meaningless. A man was dead, and the estate was still bleeding money. She pressed her palms against her eyes and took a slow breath. Then she got up and went to find Rowan. His study door was closed. She knocked. No answer. Rowan? Nothing. She tried the handle. Unlocked. She pushed the door open. Rowan sat at his desk, a bottle of whiskey in front of him, half empty. He didn't look up when she entered. Go away, he said. No. Lydia, you can't do this alone. I'm not doing anything. He poured another glass, his movements jerky. That's the problem. Lydia closed the door behind her and crossed the room. You paid for his funeral. You're taking care of his family. You're doing what you can. It's not enough. It's more than most would do. Rowan laughed, bitter and sharp. That's a low bar. She didn't argue. He drank, set the glass down hard. I should have checked the equipment myself. I should have made sure. You can't oversee every detail. Then what good am I? The question hung in the air. Lydia pulled out the chair across from him and sat. You're trying to hold this place together with pride and guilt, and it's going to kill you. Maybe it should. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. My father built this estate on the backs of people like Peter Grimshaw, and now I'm doing the same thing. Different methods, same result. People suffer. I profit. You're not profiting. You're surviving. Is there a difference? Yes. Rowan looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. I don't know how to do this, Lydia. I don't know how to be the man everyone needs me to be. Then stop trying to be that man. Be yourself. And if that's not enough, then we figure it out. Together. He stared at her for a long moment, something raw and desperate flickering across his face. Then he looked away. You should go. Rowan, please. Lydia stood slowly. She wanted to say more, to push, but she could see it in the set of his shoulders. He was done talking. So she left. But she didn't go far. She stood in the hallway outside his study, listening to the clink of glass against glass, the creak of his chair, the ragged sound of his breathing. And she made a decision. She couldn't fix his grief. She couldn't bring Peter Grimshaw back, but she could fix the estate. She could make sure no one else died because of neglect or desperation or pride. She could do that much. So she went back to her room, pulled out the ledgers, and got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, Lydia threw herself into the numbers with a single-minded focus that left no room for anything else. She rose before dawn and worked until her eyes burned. She cross-referenced contracts, renegotiated supplier agreements, found inefficiencies Garrett had missed. She cut expenses, redirected funds, restructured debt payments. The estate was a tangled mess of bad decisions layered over decades, but she pulled it apart piece by piece, thread by thread. Rowan stayed in his study most days, emerging only for brief conversations with Garrett or the occasional inspection of the fields. He looked hollowed out, like something vital had been carved away. Lydia left him alone. She had work to do. One evening, Garrett found her in the library, surrounded by papers. "You should rest," he said. "I'm fine." "You've been at this for 14 hours. I said I'm fine. Garrett sat down across from her, his expression unreadable. "You know he blames himself." "I know." "And you think fixing the estate will fix him?" Lydia looked up. "I think fixing the estate will keep us afloat long enough to figure out the rest. And if it doesn't? Then we'll deal with that when it happens." Garrett studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're more stubborn than I gave you credit for." "Is that a compliment?" "I'm not sure yet." He stood and left her to her work. Lydia went back to the numbers, her pen scratching across the page, her mind already 3 steps ahead. She didn't have time for doubt. She didn't have time for anything except this. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. Lydia sat at her desk, staring at a contract Rowan's father had signed 8 years ago, a supply agreement with a grain mill in the next valley. The terms were terrible, locked in for 10 years, with penalties for early termination. But there was a clause buried at the bottom of page 7. A renegotiation clause triggered if the mill changed ownership. Lydia's pulse quickened. She grabbed another ledger, flipping through until she found the mill's records. It had changed ownership 2 years ago, which meant the clause was active, which meant Rowan could renegotiate or walk away entirely. She sat back, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the piece she'd been missing. If they could get out of that contract and sign with a local supplier, someone closer, cheaper, they'd save thousands over the next year. Maybe more. She stood pacing the room, her mind racing. She needed to tell Rowan, but it was the middle of the night, and he'd probably drunk himself to sleep hours ago. She'd wait until morning. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Her mind kept circling back to the numbers, to the possibilities, to the fragile hope that maybe they could actually pull this off. At dawn, she got dressed and went to find him. He wasn't in his study. He wasn't in the dining room. She found him in the stables, brushing down his horse, his movements slow and mechanical. "Rowan!" He looked up, startled. "What are you doing awake?" "I found something in the contracts." He set down the brush. "What?" She explained the clause, the ownership change, the potential savings. Rowan listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he said, "How much would it save?" 4, maybe 5,000 over the next year." He exhaled slowly. "That's significant, yes." He ran a hand through his hair. "Can you draft a proposal?" "Already done." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Of course you have. I'll need you to sign off on it." "Done." Lydia hesitated. "Rowan, thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up. I'm not doing this for you. I know, but thank you anyway." She nodded and turned to leave. "Lydia." She stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, "for shutting you out. You were grieving. That's not an excuse." "No, but it's a reason." He looked at her and she saw something shift in his expression, something softer, something almost like gratitude. Then he went back to brushing the horse, and she left him to it. But as she walked back to the house, she felt something warm settle in her chest. hope. The proposal went through. The mill's new owner was eager to avoid a legal dispute and agreed to let Rowan out of the contract with minimal penalties. By the end of the week, they'd signed a new agreement with a local supplier at half the cost. It was a win. A real, tangible win. Lydia felt like she could breathe again, but the relief was short-lived. 2 days later, Garrett came to her with bad news. "The creditor's back," he said. Lydia's stomach dropped. "We paid him. Not him. A different one." "How many are there?" Garrett's face was grim. "More than I thought." He handed her a letter. Lydia scanned it, her pulse quickening. Another debt. Another £3,000, due in 6 weeks. "Where is this coming from?" she asked. "Rowan's father took out loans we didn't know about. Private loans. No records in the ledgers." "How is that possible?" "He was desperate and stupid." Lydia sat down, her hands shaking. "Does Rowan know?" "Not yet. We have to tell him." "I know." They found Rowan in the courtyard talking to one of the groundskeepers. Garrett pulled him aside and Lydia watched his face go pale as he read the letter. "This can't be right," Rowan said. "I checked. It's legitimate." Rowan swore under his breath. "How many more are there?" "I don't know, but I'm looking." Rowan crumpled the letter in his fist. "This is never going to end, is it?" "Not unless we find a way to clear them all at once," Lydia said. "And how do we do that?" She didn't have an answer. Rowan threw the letter to the ground and walked away. Lydia picked it up, smoothing the creases, her mind already racing. There had to be a way. There had to be. That night, she couldn't sleep again. She sat at her desk, staring at the numbers, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. They'd cut every expense they could. They'd renegotiated every contract. They'd leased the Western fields. There was nothing left to sell, nothing left to cut. Unless... She stopped, her pen hovering over the page. There was one thing, one asset they hadn't touched, the house itself. Greymont Estate was old, historic, sprawling. It was worth a fortune. If they mortgaged it, if they took out a loan against the property, they could pay off all the debts at once. But it was a risk, a huge risk. If they couldn't keep up with the payments, they'd lose everything. Lydia sat back, her heart pounding. She couldn't suggest this to Rowan. He'd never agree. This house was his legacy, his father's legacy, the one thing he had left. But what was the alternative? Slow collapse? Death by 1,000 cuts? She stared at the numbers until they blurred. Then she made a decision. She'd present it to him, not as a demand, not as a solution, but as an option, and let him decide. The next morning, she found him in his study. "I need to talk to you," she said. He looked up, wary. "About what?" "About the debts." His expression darkened. "I don't want to talk about the debts. We don't have a choice." "Lydia, just listen, please." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Fine." She laid out the proposal, the mortgage, the loan, the risks, the potential payoff. When she finished, Rowan was silent for a long time. Then he said, "No." "Rowan," I said no. "You're not even considering it." "There's nothing to consider. I'm not mortgaging this house." "Then what are you going to do?" "I don't know." "That's not good enough." His hand slammed down on the desk. "What do you want from me, Lydia? You want me to gamble everything we have on a plan that might fail? You want me to risk losing the one thing my family has left?" "Your family doesn't have anything left." Lydia's voice rose despite herself. "You're buried in debt. You're one bad month away from losing this place anyway. At least this gives you a chance." "It's not a chance. It's a trap. It's a solution. It's suicide." They stared at each other, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then Rowan said quietly, "Get out." Lydia's chest tightened. "Rowan, I said get out." She stood slowly, her hands trembling. "You're going to lose everything," she said. "Then I'll lose it on my terms." Lydia turned and walked out, her heart pounding, her throat tight. She went to her room and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. She'd pushed too hard. She'd overstepped. But she'd been right. She knew she'd been right. And that made it worse. Aunt. 3 days later, another creditor showed up. Then another. Within a week, there were 5 new debts, all demanding payment within the month. Rowan stopped eating. He barely slept. He spent his days locked in his study, going through his father's old papers, looking for something, anything, that might help. Lydia watched him unravel from a distance. She wanted to help, but he wouldn't let her. One night, she heard shouting from his study. She ran downstairs and found Garrett and Rowan facing off across the desk, their voices raised. "You're not thinking straight," Garrett was saying. "I'm thinking fine. You're going to lose everything." "Then I'll lose it." "And what about her?" Garrett gestured toward the door, where Lydia stood frozen. "What about Lydia?" Rowan looked up and saw her. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something hollow. "She'll be fine," he said quietly. "She's always fine." Lydia's breath caught. Garrett shook his head and walked out, brushing past her without a word. Rowan and Lydia stood there, staring at each other. "I heard what you said," Lydia said finally. "What?" "That I'd be fine. That I'm always fine." Rowan's jaw tightened. "You are." "No, I'm not." "Lydia." "I'm terrified, Rowan. Every single day. I'm terrified that we're going to lose this place, that all the work I've done won't matter, that you're going to shut me out and I'll have to watch you fall apart. And there's nothing I can do to stop it." Her voice broke. Rowan stared at her, stunned. "I know you didn't want me here," she continued, her words tumbling out. "I know I'm not what you needed, but I'm here. And I'm trying, and you keep pushing me away like I'm the problem when I'm the only one trying to save you." "I don't need saving." "Yes, you do." The silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. Then Rowan said, "I can't do it." "Can't do what?" "The mortgage, the loan. I can't risk it." "Why not?" "Because if I lose this house, I lose everything my father built, everything he stood for." "Your father built nothing," Lydia's voice rose. "He took a failing estate and made it worse. He left you with debts and bad decisions and a legacy of pride that's choking you to death. And if you don't let it go, it's going to take you down with it." Rowan's face went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do. And so do you. You're just too scared to admit it. Get out." "No, Lydia, I'm not leaving. Not until you listen." "There's nothing to listen to." "Then look at this." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and threw it on the desk. Rowan stared at it. "What is that?" "A list of every debt your father left you. Every loan, every bad investment, every stupid decision. I've been compiling it for weeks." Rowan picked up the paper slowly, his hands shaking. He unfolded it and read. Lydia watched the color drain from his face as he scanned the list, page after page of debts, failures, lies. When he finished, he set it down and sat heavily in his chair. "How much?" he asked quietly. "Total, £15,000. Rowan closed his eyes. "We don't have that," he said. "I know. We'll never have that. Not without the mortgage." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "And if it doesn't work? Then we lose. But at least we tried. That's not good enough. It's all we have." Rowan stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened fields. Lydia waited, her heart pounding. Finally, he said, "Do it." "What?" "The mortgage, the loan, whatever it takes." He turned to face her. "Do it." Lydia's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "No, but you're right. We don't have a choice." She nodded slowly. "I'll draft the proposal tonight." "Good." He walked past her toward the door, then stopped. "Lydia." "Yes?" "I'm sorry for everything." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. And he left. The next morning, Lydia and Garrett rode into town to meet with the bank. The manager was a thin, balding man named Mr. Whitmore, who looked at them over the top of his spectacles like they were wasting his time. "A mortgage on Greymont Estate," he said, flipping through Lydia's proposal, "for £15,000. "Yes," Lydia said, "that's a significant sum." "The property is worth more than double that." "On paper, perhaps. But the estate is in decline. Everyone knows that. We're turning it around." Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" Lydia laid out the changes they'd made. The lease with the rail company, the renegotiated contracts, the cuts to expenses. Whitmore listened, his expression skeptical. When she finished, he set down the papers and folded his hands. "I'll need collateral," he said. "The house is collateral." "Not enough. Not with the estate's current financial state." "Then what do you want?" Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "Personal guarantees from both you and Mr. Ashcroft. If the estate defaults, we take everything. The house, the land, your personal assets." Lydia's stomach dropped. "That's... Take it or leave it, Mrs. Ashcroft." She looked at Garrett, who shook his head slightly. But she thought about Rowan, standing in his study, finally agreeing to take the risk. She thought about the estate, teetering on the edge. She thought about Peter Grimshaw's widow and all the other people who depended on Greymont surviving. "We'll take it," she said. Whitmore smiled, cold and sharp. "Excellent. I'll have the papers drawn up by the end of the week." They left the bank in silence. Outside, Garrett turned to her. "Do you know what you just agreed to?" "Yes." "If this doesn't work—" "I know. Lydia, I know." She climbed into the carriage, her hands shaking, and didn't speak the entire ride home. "What?" When they returned to the estate, Rowan was waiting in the courtyard. "How did it go?" he asked. Lydia climbed down from the carriage. "They'll give us the loan." Relief flooded his face. "That's on the condition that we personally guarantee it. If we default, we lose everything." The relief vanished. "Everything?" "Everything." Rowan stared at her. "And you agreed?" "I had to." "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did. Because it was the only way." "Lydia..." "It's done, Rowan. The papers are being drawn up. We sign them next week." He ran a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "You had no right." "I had every right. I'm your wife. This is my estate too." "And if we fail?" "Then we fail together." Rowan looked at her, something raw and desperate in his eyes. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Lydia stood in the courtyard, her chest tight, her hands trembling. Garrett came up beside her. "You just bet everything." "I know." "And if you lose?" Lydia looked out at the estate, the fields, the house, the land that had become hers in spite of everything. "Then at least I'll know I tried," she said. But her voice shook when she said it, because for the first time since she'd arrived, she wasn't sure trying would be enough. The papers arrived on a Thursday. Lydia sat at the dining table, staring at the thick envelope Garrett had brought from town. Her name was on it alongside Rowan's, written in precise black ink that looked official and final. She didn't open it. Rowan came in from the fields an hour later, dirt on his boots, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He'd been working alongside the groundskeepers for the past 3 days, digging, clearing, trying to outrun his own thoughts. It wasn't working. He saw the envelope and stopped. "That's it?" he asked. Lydia nodded. He crossed the room, picked it up, turned it over in his hands. For a moment she thought he might tear it in half. Instead, he set it back down carefully, like it might explode. "We should read it," she said. "I know." But he didn't move. Lydia reached across the table and broke the seal herself. She pulled out the documents, page after page of dense legal language, clauses and conditions and consequences spelled out in unflinching detail. She read through them slowly, her stomach tightening with every paragraph. When she finished, she looked up at Rowan. "It's worse than I thought," she said quietly. "How much worse? If we miss a single payment, they can call the entire loan. We'd have 30 days to pay it back in full, or they take everything." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Everything?" "The house, the land, our personal property, everything." He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "So we've tied a noose around our own necks." "Yes." "And you still think this was the right choice?" Lydia met his eyes. "I think it was the only choice." He didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at the papers, his shoulders curved inward like he was carrying something too heavy to hold. "When do we sign?" he asked finally. "Tomorrow, at the bank." He nodded once. "Fine." Then he stood and walked out. Lydia sat alone at the table, the documents spread in front of her, and wondered if she'd just saved them or destroyed them completely. She wouldn't know for months, maybe longer, and by then it would be too late to change course. The next morning they rode to town together. Neither of them spoke. The silence in the carriage felt like a third passenger, heavy and oppressive. At the bank, Mr. Whitmore greeted them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashcroft, right on time." He led them to a private office and laid out the papers. Lydia read through them again, checking every clause, every number. Rowan sat beside her, his hands folded on the table, his expression unreadable. "Everything seems in order," Whitmore said. "If you'll just sign here. And here." He pushed a pen toward Rowan. Rowan picked it up, hesitated. Lydia held her breath. Then he signed. 3 quick strokes, his handwriting bold and angular. Whitmore turned the papers toward Lydia. She took the pen and signed her name beside his. It felt like signing a death warrant. "Excellent," Whitmore said, collecting the documents. "The funds will be transferred to your account by the end of the week. First payment is due in 30 days. "We know," Lydia said. Whitmore's smile widened. "I'm sure you'll manage just fine." He didn't sound sure at all. They left the bank and climbed back into the carriage. As they pulled away, Rowan finally spoke. "There's no going back now." "No," Lydia said. "There isn't." He looked at her and she saw something shift in his expression. Not quite trust, but something close to it. "Then we'd better make this work," he said. "Yes," she said quietly. "We had better." The loan came through 3 days later, £15,000 deposited into the estate's account. Lydia sat in Rowan's study with Garrett, dividing the funds across a dozen different creditors. It was like watching water pour into a bucket with holes in the bottom. The money disappeared almost as fast as it arrived, but when the dust settled, the debts were paid. All of them. For the first time in years, Greymont Estate was in the black. Barely, precariously, but in the black. "It's done," Garrett said, leaning back in his chair. "Every creditor paid in full." Lydia exhaled slowly. "And the first loan payment?" "Due in 27 days. How much do we have left?" Garrett checked his ledger. "After paying the debts?" "About £800. Lydia's stomach dropped. "That's not enough." "I know." "We need £2,000 for the first payment." "I know." "So where do we get £1,200 in 3 weeks?" Garrett shook his head. "I don't know." Lydia stood and paced the room, her mind racing. They'd cleared the debts, but they'd burned through the loan in the process. And now they had to start making payments on money they'd already spent. It was a trap, just like Rowan had said. But there had to be a way out. There had to be. She stopped pacing and looked at Garrett. "The rail lease. When's the next payment?" "Not for another 2 months." "Can we negotiate in advance? Maybe, but it'll cost us." "How much?" 10, maybe 15%. Lydia did the math in her head. An advance on the rail lease would give them enough to cover the loan payment, but it would eat into their future income. They'd be robbing from tomorrow to pay for today. But what choice did they have? "Set up a meeting," she said, "with the rail company, as soon as possible." Garrett nodded and left. Lydia sank into Rowan's chair and pressed her palms against her eyes. This was getting harder, not easier. Every solution created 2 new problems. Every step forward felt like walking on ice that was cracking beneath her feet. She heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up to see Rowan standing in the doorway. "Garrett said you need to talk to the rail company," he said. "We need an advance on the lease payment." "Why?" "Because we don't have enough to cover the loan." Rowan's expression darkened. "We just got £15,000. And we spent it paying your father's debts." He flinched. Lydia stood. "I'm not blaming you. I'm stating a fact. We're still short. And if we don't find £1,200 in 3 weeks, the bank takes everything." Rowan crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk. "So we borrow more. From who?" "I don't know. Someone. Everyone we owe money to has already been paid. There's no one left." "Then we sell something." "Like what?" He gestured vaguely. "The furniture, the paintings, something." Lydia shook her head. "It won't be enough. Not fast enough." "Then what do you suggest?" "I just told you. Advance on the rail lease. And what happens when that runs out?" "I don't know." The words hung between them, sharp and honest. Rowan looked at her, and she saw the fear underneath the anger. "I can't lose this place," he said quietly. "I know. I mean it, Lydia. I can't. Then help me save it. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. What do you need me to do? The meeting with the rail company was set for the following Monday. Lydia spent the weekend preparing, calculating figures, drafting proposals, anticipating objections. She barely slept. By Sunday night, her eyes were dry and gritty, her hand cramped from writing. Rowan found her in the library just after midnight. You should rest, he said. I'm fine. You're exhausted. I said I'm fine. He walked over and gently took the pen from her hand. Lydia. She looked up at him, and suddenly the exhaustion hit her all at once. Her vision blurred. Her throat tightened. I don't know if this is going to work, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know. And if it doesn't, then we'll figure something else out. There is nothing else, Rowan. This is it. This is the last move. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat. Then we make it count. She wanted to believe him, but belief felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. What if I'm wrong? She asked. What if I've been wrong this whole time? You haven't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He reached over and took her hand. You saved this place, Lydia. Not me. You. And whatever happens next, that doesn't change. His hand was warm, rough with calluses. She looked down at their intertwined fingers and felt something break loose in her chest. I'm scared, she said. So am I. You don't seem scared. I'm good at hiding it. She laughed, a short, shaky sound. Rowan squeezed her hand gently. We're going to be fine. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I won't let you do this alone. Lydia looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something different in his face. The walls were still there, but they'd cracked, enough to let her see the man underneath, the man she'd started to care about in spite of everything. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded and stood, still holding her hand. Come on. You need sleep. I need to finish. It can wait. She wanted to argue, but she was too tired, so she let him pull her to her feet and lead her upstairs. At her door, he hesitated. Good night, Lydia. Good night. He turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, he said, not looking at her, you were right about all of it. My father, the estate, me. Lydia's breath caught. I was trying to live up to something that was never real, he continued, and it almost destroyed everything. He finally looked at her. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Rowan nodded back and walked down the hallway to his own room. Lydia stood there for a moment, her hand still warm from his touch. Then she went inside and fell into bed, asleep before her head hit the pillow. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Lydia dressed carefully, her best dress, her hair pinned neatly. She wanted to look competent, confident, like someone who knew what she was doing, even if she didn't. Rowan was waiting in the courtyard when she came down, already dressed in his formal coat. Ready? He asked. No. Good. Neither am I. They rode to the rail depot together, where they were met by Mr. Brennan and two other company representatives. The men looked at Lydia with thinly veiled skepticism when she started speaking, but she ignored it. She laid out the proposal clearly, an advance of £2,000 against the next quarter's lease payment, with a modest fee for the early withdrawal. Brennan listened, his fingers drumming against the table. And why should we agree to this? He asked when she finished. Because it's in your best interest, Lydia said. We need the capital to keep the estate running smoothly. If we fail, you lose your depot location. You'd have to renegotiate with whoever buys the land, if anyone does. This way, you guarantee continuity. We could just wait for the regular payment schedule. You could, but we both know time is money. This advances your cash flow. Brennan smiled slightly. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Ashcroft. I drive a fair one. He glanced at his colleagues, who nodded. 10% fee, he said. 5. 8. 6. Brennan's smile widened. Done. They shook hands. The money was transferred that afternoon. Lydia and Rowan rode back to Greymont in silence, but this time it was different. The tension had shifted into something else. Relief, maybe. Or exhaustion. Or both. You were incredible, Rowan said finally. Lydia looked at him, surprised. I was terrified. You didn't show it. Neither did you. I wasn't doing anything. You did all the talking. You were there, that mattered. He looked at her, and something passed between them, understanding maybe, or the beginning of it. When they reached the estate, Garrett was waiting with news. The loan payment cleared, he said. We're current. Lydia felt her knees go weak with relief. And the accounts? Depleted, but current. So we're starting from zero again. Essentially, yes. Rowan rubbed his face. How long do we have until the next payment? 30 days. And how much do we need? Same as before. 2,000. Lydia did the math in her head. The rail lease would cover it, barely, if they could stretch the estate's other income far enough. It would be tight, painfully tight, but possible. We can do this, she said. Garrett looked skeptical. Can we? We have to. Over the next 3 weeks, Lydia ran the estate like a military operation. She cut every unnecessary expense. She renegotiated supplier contracts on the fly. She found efficiencies Garrett had missed, redundancies that could be eliminated. And slowly, painfully slowly, the numbers started to improve. The workers noticed. At first they'd whispered about her, the unwanted wife who'd shown up from nowhere. But as the estate stabilized, as their wages became reliable again, the whispers changed. She heard it one afternoon when she was walking past the stables. She's the one keeping this place afloat, one of the groundskeepers was saying. Aye, another replied. Mr. Ashcroft's a good man, but he was drowning. She threw him a rope. More like she dove in and dragged him to shore. They laughed, and Lydia felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. They saw her. They saw what she was doing. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. That evening, Mrs. Calloway approached her in the hallway. Mrs. Ashcroft, she said, her tone formal but not cold. I wanted to apologize. Lydia blinked. For what? For underestimating you. When you first arrived, I thought... She paused, choosing her words carefully. I thought you were temporary. I was wrong. Mrs. Calloway, you've done more for this estate in 3 months than most would in 3 years. And I wanted you to know that I see that. We all do. Lydia's throat tightened. Thank you. Mrs. Calloway nodded and walked away. Lydia stood there for a moment, her hands trembling slightly. She'd spent so long feeling invisible, unwanted, and now she was seen. The second loan payment came due on a Wednesday. This time there was enough. Barely, but enough. When the payment cleared, Lydia allowed herself 1 full minute of relief before diving back into the ledgers. They weren't safe yet. Not even close. But they were still standing, and that had to count for something. That night, Rowan found her in the library again. You're always working, he said. Someone has to. Not always. Not tonight. He held out his hand. Lydia looked at it, confused. What? Come with me. She let him pull her to her feet and lead her downstairs, through the house, out into the courtyard. The night was clear, the sky full of stars. Rowan stopped in the middle of the yard and turned to face her. What are we doing? She asked. I don't know. Not working. She laughed despite herself. That's not much of a plan. No. But it's something. They stood there in the darkness, the estate quiet around them. Lydia looked up at the stars and felt, for the first time in months, like she could breathe. We're going to make it, Rowan said quietly. You don't know that. Yes, I do, because you won't let us fail. Lydia looked at him. That's not fair, putting it all on me. I'm not. I'm stating a fact. You're the strongest person I've ever met. I'm not... You are. And I should have seen it from the start. His voice was rough, honest. Lydia felt her eyes sting. I didn't want to be here, she said. When I married you, I didn't want this life. I know. But somewhere along the way it became mine. This place, these people. She paused. You. Rowan stepped closer. Lydia, I'm not asking for anything, she said quickly. I just wanted you to know. He reached up and touched her face, his hand gentle. I don't deserve you, he said. Probably not. He laughed, soft and surprised. Then he kissed her. It was nothing like the kiss at their wedding, cold and perfunctory and empty. This was warm, real, weighted with everything they'd been through and everything they hadn't said. When he pulled back, Lydia's heart was pounding. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have asked." "Don't apologize." He smiled, and she realized she'd never really seen him smile before. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, lighter, like the man he might have been if his father's legacy hadn't crushed him. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let's go inside." They walked back to the house together, fingers intertwined. At the base of the stairs, Rowan hesitated. "Your room or mine?" he asked quietly. Lydia's breath caught. "Yours," she said. He led her upstairs, down the hallway she'd walked alone so many times before. His room was larger than hers, darker, more lived in. The bed was unmade, books stacked on the nightstand. He turned to face her, suddenly uncertain. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Neither do I." "We've been married 3 months." "I know." "This is different," Lydia finished. "Yes." He stepped closer, his hands finding her waist. "I want to do this right," he said. "There is no right. There's just us." He kissed her again, slower this time, and Lydia felt the last of her walls come down. This wasn't duty. This wasn't obligation. This was choice. The next morning, Lydia woke in Rowan's bed, sunlight streaming through the window. He was still asleep beside her, one arm draped across her waist. She lay there for a moment, watching him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. For the first time since she'd arrived at Greymont, she felt like she belonged. Not because the estate was surviving, not because the workers respected her, but because the man beside her finally saw her. Really saw her. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him, and padded across the room to the window. The field stretched out before her, green and gold in the morning light. The western section was already marked for the rail depot, workers moving like ants in the distance. The estate was still fragile. The debts were still crushing. But they were moving forward, together. Rowan stirred behind her. "Come back to bed." She turned and smiled. "It's late. It's barely dawn." "Exactly. We have work to do." He groaned, but sat up. "You're relentless. You're welcome." He laughed and got up, pulling on his clothes. "What's on the agenda today?" "Garrett wants to review the next quarter's projections, and I need to talk to the mill about adjusting our delivery schedule." "Sounds riveting." "It is, actually." He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. "You're a strange woman." "You're just realizing that now?" "No, but I'm appreciating it more." They dressed and went downstairs together. In the dining room, Garrett was already waiting with a stack of papers. "Good morning," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes knowing. Lydia felt her face heat. "Good morning." Rowan sat beside her, unapologetic. "What do you have?" Garrett spread the papers across the table. "Good news, actually. The grain contracts are performing better than expected. And the rail lease is ahead of schedule." "How much ahead?" Lydia asked. "Enough that we should be able to cover the next 2 loan payments without stretching." Lydia felt relief flood through her. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. Barring disaster." "Don't say that," Rowan muttered. Garrett smiled. "I'm cautiously optimistic." "That's a first," Lydia said. Over the next month, the momentum built. The estate's income stabilized. The loan payments cleared on time. The workers stopped looking at Lydia like she was temporary and started treating her like she belonged. And Rowan changed, not overnight, not dramatically, but in small, steady ways. He started asking her opinion before making decisions. He included her in meetings with suppliers and creditors. He stopped hiding in his study and started working alongside her. They became partners, in every sense of the word. One evening, after a particularly long day, they stood on the terrace overlooking the estate. "I never thought we'd make it this far," Rowan said. "We're not done yet." "I know, but we're closer." Lydia leaned against the railing. "Do you regret it? The mortgage?" "No, you were right. It was the only way." "And us?" He looked at her. "What about us?" "Do you regret that?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Marrying you was the best thing my father ever forced me to do." Lydia laughed. "That's romantic." "I mean it. I didn't want you, but you're exactly what I needed." "You've said that before." "I'll keep saying it until you believe me." She turned to face him. "I believe you." He smiled and pulled her close. And for the first time in her life, Lydia felt truly seen, truly valued, truly wanted, not for what she could do, but for who she was. The turning point came 6 weeks later. They were hosting a dinner for the neighboring landowners, something Rowan had resisted but Lydia insisted on. It was time to show the valley that Greymont was back. The dining room was full, the table laden with food they could finally afford. Lydia sat at Rowan's right hand, dressed in a gown she'd bought with money they'd earned. Edmund, the red-faced landowner who'd been at their wedding, raised his glass. "To Rowan and Lydia Ashcroft," he said, "and to Greymont's remarkable recovery." The guests murmured agreement. Edmund continued, his eyes on Lydia. "I'll be honest, Mrs. Ashcroft. When you arrived, I didn't think much of you. Thought you were just another bride married off for convenience." Lydia's stomach tightened, but she kept her face neutral. "I was wrong," Edmund said. "You've done what none of us thought possible. You've saved this estate, and you've done it with more intelligence and grace than most men I know could muster." The table erupted in applause. Lydia felt her face flush. Rowan reached over and took her hand under the table, squeezing gently. When the applause died down, he stood. "My wife is the reason we're still standing," he said, his voice clear and firm. "Everything you see here, the recovered fields, the new partnerships, the financial stability, that's her work, not mine. I was drowning, and she pulled me out, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows it." The room went silent. Then someone started clapping, and then everyone was on their feet, applauding. Lydia sat there, stunned, as the recognition she'd never asked for washed over her. Rowan looked down at her and smiled, and she realized something. She'd won. Not the estate, not the debts, but him. And somehow that mattered more than all of it. The applause still rang in Lydia's ears long after the guests had left. She stood in the empty dining room, watching the servants clear the tables, and tried to process what had just happened. Edmund's words, Rowan's speech, the way every person in that room had looked at her, not with pity or skepticism, but with respect, recognition. She'd spent her entire life being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, and tonight, for the first time, she'd been seen for exactly who she was. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt strange, unfamiliar, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit yet. Rowan came up beside her, loosening his cravat. "You're quiet." "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About how strange this all is. 6 months ago, I was nobody, and now, you're the woman who saved Greymont Estate." She looked at him. "I didn't do it alone." "No, but you did most of it." "That's not true." "Lydia," he turned her to face him, "stop diminishing what you've done. You earned this. Every word Edmund said tonight was true." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He meant it. He really meant it. "Thank you," she said quietly. He kissed her forehead. "Come on, let's get some sleep. Tomorrow starts early." "Tomorrow always starts early." "And whose fault is that?" She smiled despite herself. "Mine." "Exactly." They went upstairs together, his hand warm in hers, and Lydia felt something settle in her chest. Not quite contentment, there was still too much work to do for that, but something close. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of it. But peace didn't last long. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the bank. Lydia was in the library when Garrett brought it to her, his face pale. "What is it?" she asked. "Read it." She took the envelope and broke the seal. The letter was short, formal, and devastating. The bank was calling the loan. All of it. Immediately. Lydia read it twice, her hands shaking. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "We've been making every payment. We're current." "I know." "So why me?" "Keep reading." She scanned down to the explanation. The bank had been purchased by a larger institution. New management, new policies. All outstanding high-risk loans were being called in for immediate repayment. Greymont fell into that category. They had 30 days to pay back the full £15,000, or lose everything. Lydia's vision swam. "We don't have £15,000. "I know. We've been using the loan payments to keep the estate running. There's nothing left in reserve." "I know." "So what do we do?" Garrett shook his head. "I don't know." Lydia stood, pacing the room, her mind racing. This was impossible. They'd done everything right, made every payment on time, turned the estate around, and now some bureaucrat in a distant office was going to take it all away because of a policy change. It wasn't fair. But fairness didn't matter. Where's Rowan? She asked. In the fields. Get him now. Garrett left. Lydia sat at the desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. There had to be a way out. There had to be. She started calculating, running numbers, looking for options. But every path led to the same conclusion. They were finished. Unless... She stopped, her pen hovering over the page. The rail company. They'd already given them an advance once. What if they could negotiate a larger one? Or better yet, what if they could sell them a portion of the land outright instead of leasing it? It would mean giving up ownership permanently. Rowan would hate it, but it might be their only chance. She was still sketching out the proposal when Rowan burst into the library, dirt on his clothes, Garrett behind him. What's happened? Rowan demanded. Lydia handed him the letter. She watched his face go white as he read. This can't be legal, he said. It is. I checked the contract. They have the right to call the loan if the bank changes ownership. So we're done. Not yet. He looked at her. What are you planning? The rail company. We sell them the Western Fields outright, not a lease, a sale. No. Rowan? I said no. That's Ashcroft land. It's been in my family for generations. And it'll be gone entirely if we don't do something. Not this. Not selling. Then what? He didn't answer. Lydia stood and crossed to him. I know this is hard. I know you don't want to give up your father's land, but we're out of options. There has to be another way. There isn't. I've been over the numbers a dozen times. This is it. Rowan's jaw worked. He looked at the letter again, then at her. How much would they pay? I don't know, but enough to clear the loan and have something left over. And you're sure they'd buy? I won't know until I ask. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, Do it. Are you sure? No, but you're right. We don't have a choice. Lydia nodded and turned to Garrett. Set up a meeting. Today if possible. I'll try. He left. Rowan sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Lydia knelt beside him. I'm sorry. For what? For this. All of it. He looked up at her. You didn't cause this. I convinced you to take the loan. And if you hadn't, we'd already be bankrupt. At least this way we have a chance. He reached out and took her hand. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I don't regret it. Any of it. Not the loan. Not the risk. Not you. Lydia's throat tightened. Even if we lose? Even then. She kissed him, quick and fierce, and stood. We're not losing, she said. Not yet. The meeting was set for that evening. Lydia rode to the rail depot with Garrett, leaving Rowan behind to handle the estate. He'd wanted to come, but she'd convinced him to stay. This negotiation required a clear head, and he was too emotional about the land. She understood, but she couldn't afford to be emotional. Not now. Mr. Brennan met them in his office, a cramped room smelling of tobacco and machine oil. Mrs. Ashcroft, he said, shaking her hand, to what do I owe the pleasure? I have a proposal. Another one? He smiled. You're nothing if not persistent. The Western Fields. You've been leasing them for your depot. Yes. I want to sell them to you outright. Brennan's eyebrows rose. That's a significant change from our current arrangement. The situation has changed. How so? Lydia hesitated. She didn't want to show weakness, but she needed him to understand the urgency. Our lender is calling in the loan, she said. We need to liquidate assets quickly. Brennan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. I see. And how much are you asking? Lydia named a figure, high enough to clear the loan with a cushion, but not so high that he'd walk away. Brennan whistled. That's steep. It's fair, you know it is. The land is perfectly positioned. You'd be paying triple that to acquire anything comparable. Perhaps, but I'd also have time to negotiate. You don't have time. The rail expansion is happening now. If you don't secure this land, your competition will snap up the next available plot, and you'll lose your advantage. Brennan studied her. You're very good at this. I'm desperate. There's a difference. He laughed. Fair enough. He pulled out a ledger and flipped through it. I can offer you $12,000. Lydia's stomach dropped. That's not enough. It's what I have authorization for. Then get more authorization. It's not that simple. Make it simple. Brennan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Wait here." He left the office. Lydia sat there, her hands clenched in her lap, her heart pounding. 12,000 wasn't enough. They needed at least 14 to clear the loan and have anything left over. If Brennan couldn't go higher, they were finished. He returned 20 minutes later with a telegram in his hand. 14,000, he said. That's my absolute maximum. Take it or leave it. Lydia exhaled slowly. We'll take it. They shook hands. I'll have the papers drawn up tomorrow, Brennan said. Funds transferred by the end of the week. Thank you. Don't thank me. You drove a hard bargain. Lydia left the depot with Garrett, her legs shaking. You did it, Garrett said. We did it. No, that was all you. She climbed into the carriage, and as they pulled away, she finally let herself feel the weight of what had just happened. They'd sold Ashcroft land that had been in Rowan's family for generations, land his father had poured his life into trying to restore. Rowan was going to be devastated, but they'd survive. And right now, that was all that mattered. When she got back to Graymont, Rowan was waiting in the courtyard. Well, he asked. 14,000. Relief flooded his face. That's enough. Barely, but yes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I'm sorry, she said against his chest. For what? For making you give up your father's land. He pulled back to look at her. You didn't make me do anything. I chose this. We chose this. Still, my father's land was killing me, Lydia. It's been killing me for years, and now it's gone, and I'm still here. We're still here. He kissed her forehead. That's all that matters, he said. The sale went through 3 days later. Lydia and Rowan rode to the bank together to pay off the loan. Mr. Whitmore looked almost disappointed when they handed him the draft. I have to admit, he said, I didn't think you'd make it. Neither did we, Lydia said. Whitmore stamped the papers and handed them a receipt. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Ashcroft. You're debt-free. The words felt surreal. They walked out of the bank into bright afternoon sunlight, and Lydia felt like she could finally breathe. It's over, she said. Not quite. She looked at Rowan. What do you mean? We still have an estate to run, workers to pay, a future to build. I know, but we're not drowning anymore. No, he said, taking her hand. We're not. They rode back to Graymont, and for the first time in months, the silence between them felt comfortable. Easy, like they'd finally found their rhythm. That night, Rowan called a meeting with all the estate workers. They gathered in the courtyard, groundskeepers, stable hands, house staff, everyone who kept Graymont running. Lydia stood beside Rowan, watching their faces, wondering what he was going to say. I wanted to thank you all, Rowan began. This past year has been difficult, for all of us. But you've stuck with this estate even when it looked like we might not survive. The workers shifted, murmuring. We've made some hard choices, Rowan continued. Sold land, cut expenses, changed the way we operate, and I know that hasn't been easy. He paused. But we're still here, and that's because of you, your work, your loyalty, your willingness to adapt. He gestured to Lydia. And it's because of my wife. She came here knowing nothing about this place, and she saved it anyway. She saw what needed to be done and did it, even when everyone, including me, doubted her. Lydia felt her face heat. From now on, Rowan said, when you have concerns, when you have ideas, when you see something that needs fixing, you bring it to her. She's not just my wife. She's a partner in running this estate, and she has my full authority to make decisions. The workers erupted in applause. Lydia stood there, stunned, as Rowan turned to her and took her hand. You earned this, he said quietly. Don't argue. She didn't. She couldn't. The workers dispersed and Rowan led her back inside. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did. Why? Because it's true, and because everyone needs to know it. He stopped in the hallway and turned to face her. I was wrong about you, he said, from the beginning. I thought you were weak, a burden, someone I was forced to carry. Rowan, but you're the strongest person I know, and I don't just respect you. I love you. Lydia's breath caught. He'd never said it before. Neither of them had. You love me? She whispered. Yes, I think I have for a while now. I just didn't know how to say it. Tears pricked her eyes. I love you too. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that changed his whole face. Then he kissed her, slow and deep, and Lydia felt something click into place inside her chest. This was home, not the estate, not the house. Him. Over the next 6 months, Greymont transformed. With the debts cleared, Lydia had room to breathe, to plan, to build, instead of just survive. She restructured the estate's operations, invested in new equipment, expanded the partnerships with local suppliers. The Western Fields became a thriving rail depot, bringing in steady income without the backbreaking work of farming marginal land. The grain contracts performed better than expected. The workers were paid on time, every time. And slowly, carefully, Lydia and Rowan built a reserve fund, something to protect them if disaster struck again. The valley noticed. Other landowners started asking Lydia for advice. She became known not as Rowan's wife, but as the woman who'd turned Greymont around. Invitations arrived to speak at agricultural societies, to consult on estate management, to join committees. She accepted some, declined others, but she never forgot where she'd started. One afternoon, she was in the library when Mrs. Calloway knocked. Ma'am, there's someone here to see you. Who? Peter Grimshaw's widow. Lydia's stomach tightened. She hadn't spoken to the woman since the funeral, though she'd been sending her a portion of her own income every month through Garrett. Send her in. Mrs. Calloway left, and a moment later a thin woman in a worn dress appeared in the doorway, a small child on her hip. Mrs. Ashcroft, she said quietly. Mrs. Grimshaw, please, sit. The woman sat, perching on the edge of the chair like she might bolt at any moment. I wanted to thank you, she said, for the money, for everything you've done. It's the least I could do. It's more than anyone else has done. She shifted the child higher on her hip. My Peter, he used to talk about you after you came to the estate. He said you were different, said you actually cared. Lydia's throat tightened. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. You didn't kill him. The accident did. And you've taken care of us since. That's more than I had any right to expect. You have every right. Mrs. Grimshaw smiled, tired but genuine. I just wanted you to know. You're a good woman, Mrs. Ashcroft. This valley's lucky to have you. She stood and left before Lydia could respond. Lydia sat there for a long time, staring at the door, feeling the weight of those words. The valley's lucky to have you. She'd never imagined anyone would say that to her. That night, she told Rowan about the visit. She's right, he said. About what? The valley is lucky to have you, and so am I. Lydia leaned against him. You're not so bad yourself. He laughed and kissed the top of her head. They sat there in comfortable silence, and Lydia thought about how far they'd come. From strangers forced together by duty, to partners, to something more. Winter came, and with it, the first real test of their new stability. A harsh frost killed half the grain crop in the valley. Other estates panicked, scrambling to cover losses. But Greymont weathered it. They had the reserve fund, they had diversified income from the rail lease, they had a plan, and they had each other. By spring, when the other estates were still recovering, Greymont was already planting new crops, hiring more workers, expanding operations. Edmund stopped by one afternoon, ostensibly to discuss grain prices, but Lydia suspected he had other motives. You've done well, he said, looking around the estate. Better than well. You've made the rest of us look like fools. That wasn't the goal, Lydia said. Maybe not, but it's the result. He paused. I wanted to apologize for underestimating you, for dismissing you. You already did. At the dinner. That was public. This is private. I mean it, Mrs. Ashcroft. You're remarkable. And if I'd had half your sense when I was your age, my own estate would be in better shape. Lydia smiled. It's never too late to change. Perhaps. He tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Ashcroft. He left, and Lydia stood there, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. She'd proven herself. Not just to Rowan, not just to the workers, but to the entire valley. That evening, she and Rowan walked through the fields together, watching the sun set over the land they'd fought so hard to keep. Do you ever regret it? Rowan asked. Marrying me? Lydia thought about it, honestly. No, she said finally. I regret how it started, but not where it led. Even with everything we went through, especially because of that, we wouldn't be here otherwise. He stopped and turned to face her. I have something for you. What? He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a small emerald set in gold. I never gave you a proper wedding ring, he said. Just the family ring my father forced on me. I wanted to give you something that was ours, not his. Lydia's eyes stung. Rowan, you don't have to wear it if you don't want to, but I wanted you to have it. She held out her hand and he slipped it onto her finger beside the old ring. It fit perfectly. Thank you, she whispered. He kissed her, soft and sweet, and they stood there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A year after their wedding, Lydia stood on the terrace, looking out at Greymont Estate. The western fields were gone, replaced by the rail depot, but the rest of the land thrived, green and productive and alive. The house had been repaired, the faded tapestries replaced, the scuffed floors refinished. The workers were happy, well paid, loyal, the debts were gone, and she belonged. Rowan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. How different everything is. Better or worse? Better. Definitely better. He rested his chin on her shoulder. I have news. What kind of news? The kind that might change things again. She turned to face him. What is it? He smiled. I'm going to be a father. Lydia's breath caught. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but she hadn't been sure. Hadn't wanted to say anything until she was certain. You knew? She asked. Mrs. Calloway told me. Apparently she's known for a month. Of course she has. Rowan's smile widened. Are you happy? Terrified, but yes, happy. He kissed her, and Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks. Happy tears, for once. We're going to be fine, Rowan said. I know. Better than fine. I know that too. And she did. Because they'd survived the worst. They'd rebuilt from nothing, and they'd done it together. 6 months later, on a cold winter morning, Lydia gave birth to a daughter. They named her Eleanor, after Lydia's mother. Rowan held the baby with a gentleness Lydia hadn't known he possessed, his eyes wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. She's perfect, he said. She is. She's going to be just like you. Lydia laughed, exhausted and exhilarated. I hope not. She should have an easier life. She will, because of you. He handed Eleanor back to her, and Lydia cradled the tiny, warm weight against her chest. This was legacy, she thought. Not land, not money, not a name carved into history. But this, a child born into a home built on love instead of duty, a future earned, not inherited. Spring came again, and with it, the first anniversary of Greymont's recovery. Lydia organized a celebration, not for herself, but for the workers who'd stuck with the estate through everything. There was food, music, laughter. Rowan gave a speech, short and heartfelt, thanking everyone who'd made the past year possible. And then he raised his glass. To my wife, he said, who taught me that strength isn't about holding on to the past. It's about building something new. The crowd erupted in cheers. Lydia stood beside him, holding Eleanor, and looked out at the faces around her, people who'd become friends, family, partners in this improbable success. This was what she'd fought for. Not just survival, but belonging. Later, when the celebration had wound down and Eleanor was asleep in her crib, Lydia and Rowan stood on the terrace one last time. Do you ever think about that first night? Rowan asked. When you walked into this house and I barely looked at you? Sometimes. I was an idiot. Yes, but you learned. He laughed. Thanks to you. Thanks to both of us. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the darkness, listening to the sound of the estate settling around them. I love you, he said. I love you too. And in that moment, standing on the terrace of the estate she'd saved, holding the hand of the man she'd learned to love, Lydia felt something she'd never expected to feel in this place. Home. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers, earned through sweat and tears and relentless determination. built on partnership and trust and love that had grown in the cracks of desperation. The estate would face challenges again. She knew that. There would be bad harvests and difficult decisions and moments when everything felt impossible. But they would face them together. And that made all the difference. In the end, Lydia Ashcroft wasn't remembered as the girl from a ruined family who married above her station. She was remembered as the woman who saved Greymont Estate, who turned contempt into partnership, who proved that intelligence and courage could rewrite fate completely, and who built a legacy not on the past, but on the future she'd fought to create. A future where strength meant more than pride, where love meant more than duty, and where one underestimated woman changed everything.